you know, and so and that's how yeah. But the risk is a winner. I had it last night. It's actually a lot of fun because our, with our concept, 12 suits change every day. So even if you're a regular, there's still something new, and that's one of the great things about our concept. We have some new sandwiches as well. So that's pretty fresh.
And you live near it. You're not very far from the Capitol.
We would go up to what's where's it? Right beside Monk.
Linux.
Yeah.
The Linux.
Is that what yours is?
That one's not me.
Okay.
But we're, you know, the other owner in Columbus, we're synchronized.
Well, I would imagine joint advertising would help you both.
It will, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of looking for it right now. I've made it no secret. I would love for the other market. They might be itching towards that. But we're you know, Zoop is a small chain. There are only 60 Zoops in our country. So it's not like one of the reasons I was attracted to it is you get the benefits of a system, but there's a lot of local autonomy. I choose the engineers, we do custom things and so forth, and yet you get the consistency of the brand, and I have direct input into, if we're introducing a new sandwich chain wide, I mean, I'm on the committee that says, yeah, let's do that. You know, so it's satisfying. I don't think I would have liked to do a larger franchise, but I'm directly involved in the managing.
Oh, that's awesome.
We can go ahead and get you settled in up there. I was the head of Discover's, the merchant side of Discover Food. Then I was CEO of the payments company. So the short answer is, no, I went to Burger King High School. I think everything happens in life for a reason. I believe the reason that I chose to be involved in Zoop as my quote-unquote semi-retirement project is hardly an retirement. Is I've been at a sea level for a long time, and I have become totally insulated from everyday kind of workers and monthly problems and issues. Now I interact directly with these people. I go paycheck to paycheck. It's really grounding. I hadn't realized how far away I've gotten from that stuff. I've had the comfort of employees. His brother was shot and killed. Yeah, that's not an issue I would have ever dealt with. And so I think that's the reason the universe kind of gives us love beyond that, right? And I love every minute. I don't love current economic challenges. But even that, there are lessons we learn. We're learning to cope in ways I would have never imagined we could run our organization as thinly as we did. We used to have managers, team leads, general manager, district manager. It's me, a manager, and employees now. You know, it looks just so.
Maybe even better.
It does.
Maybe even better.
It does. Actually, I.
It's interesting to find these things on the CC. When I first started 15 years ago, we had nobody. And I am still
So what it's gonna sound like, I'll say, okay, we're rolling the intro, and it's a 30-second roll that happens on the computer, and then I'll give you a 3, 2, 1.
Okay, and where should I be?
You will be at the podium.
Oh, so I should go now?
Sure. Okay. Well, we're down to
And then do I start? Just, no.
unless you want to be dramatic.
Could you tell him to use the slimming filter on his system?
He was chair when they hired Fred. If not chair, he was chair of the search committee.
Okay.
When they hired Fred.
Any chance I could get you guys to sit at the table up there? Once you're done with your lunch? Just, it's the back of your head. It looks so empty in here. You have the right to decline. You're the president and CEO. But he's got to do it. No,
Well, you want us to move our plates and everything right now?
yeah, if you're willing, that would be great. And you get an extra salad and roll out.
I gotta keep my purse and phone with me
Yes, you
so
do.
that I can,
Okay, so segue for questions.
all right, just for you.
Time check.
We wouldn't do this for anybody.
90 seconds, stand by.
All right. They want our heads up front.
Ooh, smart. Thank you, Carol. Got a chuckle out of the Holy Ghost over here. 2 there, 1 there. I'll have to increase my budget. We're under a minute now. Stand by. Time check. 11:59. 30 seconds. You tell me when you're rolling. Coming up on noon. 90 seconds is a long time. 90 seconds is a long time. The longest 90 seconds.
Hello and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Tom Daly, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees and also the area developer for Zoop Eateries and the chair of the Board of Trustees at COSI. It's great to see you all here today. Let's welcome several new CMC members who are joining us today. Brian Williams from Local Nexus LLC. Is Brian here? Welcome. And Todd Harmon and Mark Johnson of Deloitte. Thank you for joining CMC. A word about membership. Conversation moves us forward, and members power our conversations. We need you, the patrons and the fans of CMC, to step up and support CMC during these difficult times. Please join us in our mission by becoming a member today. You can learn more about CMC, register for events, join CMC, or renew your membership or make a donation anytime at columbusmetroclub.org. We are live streamed today thanks to our live stream partners, the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. We'd also like to thank those of you watching today who purchased a virtual seat. We're very grateful for this support, and we are able to continue live streaming services in a large part because of you. Thank you. Today's forum is sponsored by Puffin Foundation West. Won't you please help me in thanking them? Ask school-age children where food comes from, and the response might be from the grocery store. You might get a similar response from many adults. For several generations, Americans have not had to worry much about food. For most of us, there has always been a plentiful supply. However, the impacts of the pandemic have brought new challenges and new awareness about how food is produced, processed, distributed to retailers, and delivered to consumers. Dr. Brian Rowe is the Associate Chair in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Developmental Economics at OSU and notified us this morning that he has been exposed to COVID-19 and is in quarantine. So he's unable to join us today, and we certainly wish him good health. But in the meantime, let's welcome our speakers who are present, who can shed light on the new realities for food from farm to table. First is Vice President of Public Policy at the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, Jack Irvin. Welcome, Jack. Vice President of Operations at T. Marzetti Company, Jeff Poor. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
And the host of today's forum, Executive Director of the Ohio Association of Food Banks, Lisa Hamler-Fugit. Lisa, welcome. Podium is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation and for a lovely lunch. And Tom, thank you, and to the Columbus Metropolitan Club, Jane, and your team for this opportunity to hold this very exciting conversation about our food systems and really the impact on the distribution chain that has resulted in the coronavirus. Since Governor Mike DeWine declared and signed an executive order declaring a state of an emergency in order to protect the health and well-being of Ohioans from the dangerous effects of COVID-19 on March 9th, it's hard to believe that it's been 233 days, some 7 months and 19 days since nearly every aspect of our daily lives have been upended. Representing the Ohio Association of Food Banks, Ohio's largest charitable response to hunger, our 12-member food banks and some 3,600 member charities, including food pantries, soup kitchens, and homeless shelters that comprise our network, we now bear witness to the immediate and immense ramifications of this public health crisis that has resulted in an economic crisis that have left millions of low and moderate income Ohioans unemployed, underemployed, and without income, struggling for the most basic of all human need, access to enough food through normal channels to feed themselves and their families, many for the first time ever. People like Robert, 36, who's a lead cook at a restaurant, and when the coronavirus outbreak started, although the restaurant he worked at has been able to stay open only on a modest basis for takeout orders, he was among the first laid off. Robert is one of the many people who now find themselves for the first time ever standing in the local line at his food bank, trying to put food on the table so he can get through these very difficult times. And yes, over the last 7 months, our food banks have experienced, on average, a sustained increase in demand for food assistance of more than 60% increase. As demand climbs, private sector donations from our very generous industry partners, local food drives, and retail pickup programs have nearly disappeared. As I've said to many, the spigot just turned off, forcing us to purchase more food than we've ever purchased before, including grocery items, to replace these critical donations. As many people struggle to make ends meet amongst historic unemployment, our supply chains become more competitive, more fragile, unreliable, and what I say is very brittle. As grocery prices have now reached a 50-year high, as retailers have worked to purchase more food and groceries to restock shelves that are rapidly depleted and empty and often left bare as many Ohioans shifted from purchasing and consuming more of their meals at home instead of eating out. They have now moved to home preparation of their food, putting additional strains that we're going to hear from our panelists today. Food manufacturers were left with the monumental task of shifting from producing and packaging food in large food service industries such as restaurants, schools, and large institutional purchasers to household pack size without the equipment and without the necessary infrastructure to be able to meet that demand and make the shift. Today, 30% of households report they are having a very difficult time covering their usual household expenses, including rent, mortgage, utilities, medical expenses, and food. So, what has this new reality meant to our food systems? From our farmers, growers, our commodity producers, to our food manufacturers. What can we expect as we continue to struggle with the economic uncertainty that has been brought on by COVID-19 on our daily lives? I'm so pleased to be joined today by my esteemed panelist, Jack Irwin from the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Jeff Poor, who will share with us in the conversation. I'm going to ask them now to please introduce themselves and to share with you, our audience, what role the food service industry and our critical food systems play that we all rely on. We too often take for granted the most basic of all human need. In addition, I'd like them to answer a couple of questions, including, how has your business changed as a result of the pandemic? I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here today. I really appreciate the chance to represent T. Marzetti. We're based here in Columbus, and we are a food manufacturer. We have 16 manufacturing sites across the United States, and needless to say, like my personal life, from a business perspective, the COVID-19 situation has really affected us, and I think you said it very well. It's not about the supply chain being broken. Right now, our supply chain, it is in a fragile position. There's a lot of moving parts that we're trying to manage day to day. And I think at Marzetti, one of the number one things that we take pride in is taking care of our people. And from early on, we took the necessary steps, starting with Hero Pay, as we talked about earlier, to make sure we really could ease that burden that our employees are facing on the outside to get them to be more involved and more engaged at work. Part of our success is we were recently certified as the best place to work at T. Marzetti. We're really proud of that. But at the same time, there's a lot of different practices that we've put into place in all of our manufacturing facilities. And while those costs can add up, we didn't look at it as a cost to the business as a negative. It was a cost of doing business and doing the right thing. And those things ranged from social distancing inside the facilities, mask use, we've accomplished to date. And we're looking forward to how we're going to do that in the future and still maintain the communication with our suppliers to continue to practice and produce as we should.
Thank you all for the opportunity here today, and Jeff and Lisa are proud to be up here with you all, so thank you. Jeff talked a lot about people, Lisa talked a lot about people, and I think that's kind of the theme of the day that we need to think about. So, from Farm Bureau, we're a membership organization, and some of the very important people of the food chain and food supply is our farmers. And Farm Bureau is an advocacy organization, and we help represent. There's 75,000 farms here in Ohio, and we represent a good portion of those and try to do our best to advocate and promote our industry. But no doubt, we've had a huge challenge throughout this. So, one of the old adages that's out there is a well-fed nation has many problems and a hungry nation has one. We're very fortunate we have a lot of problems, right? And Lisa and Jeff highlighted well a lot of the food insecurity issues, the food supply issues, but overall, I think we really have an amazing story to tell. Think about, you weren't able to get toilet paper, you weren't able to get hand sanitizer, but for the most part, our food supply was there. You might not be able to get certain cuts of meat or maybe some bread and some different issues here and there, but companies like Marzetti's here, how many people day in and day out go to work? So many of us have had the opportunity to transition and work from home. For farmers, they got to go to work. Those animals need fed, those crops need tended to, they need planted, whatever needs to be done, and they want to work. And, again, I think as a country, it is amazing to think about how well we have been able to adapt, considering how many hands touch this plate of food that you might be here eating during lunch. So we talk about, from farm to fork, but really, even if you're truly honest, you got to even go beyond the farm. So that farm needs seed, they need fertilizer, they need crop protectants, a lot of the things that they probably don't have on farm themselves. And somebody's got to produce that product and get that to the farm. And then the farmer obviously needs to do what they do and get that process moved up the chain so companies like Jeff and Marzetti's can get that package and then get it down to all of us as consumers. So I think one of the huge things to keep in mind of really just an amazing change. So Lisa kind of talked about it, I think, earlier a little bit. Roughly half of the food dollar that we spend as consumers is outside the home. So outside the traditional grocery store, farm market type model. So restaurants and schools and different areas like that. Overnight, that changed. So she talked a lot about the processing side. Me as a consumer, whatever the Marzetti's would be selling to a restaurant, I don't want that as a consumer when I go to Kroger. I want my salad dressing in a nice little bottle, right? And you just cannot flip a switch overnight. And we can get into a little bit more detail of how that impacted back up onto the farm. But a lot of the processing, a lot of the system, I think, is where we saw some of the bottlenecks. They just couldn't handle that change overnight like that. And so it frankly caused a backlog all the way up onto the farm where they didn't have homes for their animals. They didn't have places to move some of their product, through no fault of a lot of our processors, but they just couldn't make that switch overnight. And this is something to think about, and I encourage you all to think about and not take for granted just how many people day in and day out are going to work, no matter what's going on in the world, to make sure that we have full plates and have access to full plates. Now, Lisa can talk, affordability is a whole nother issue, but from the availability side, which a lot of my members are out there trying to do as farmers, we have an incredible supply of available food here in the U.S.
Thank you, Jack. And I really appreciate you really focusing on the essential. I think for a lot of us who work in professional careers, our biggest challenge has been trying to navigate Teams meeting or Zoom, right? Not knowing that every day there are people that are on the front lines who are those heroes, who are those essential workers that have really kept us from bearing the brunt of going hungry where our grocery store shelves were stocked, or from a supplier standpoint. So I'm going to pose this question to both you and Jeff. As we talk about the supply chains, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced through this process in being able to respond and and retool your systems as quickly as possible?
I can hit that one first. I think Jack mentioned it. Marzetti, a large portion of our business is towards the food service markets, the restaurants and things like that. And it is hard to get a consumer to want to buy a gallon of salad dressing or a 120-count pack of dinner rolls and things like that. And so when this pandemic did hit, the whole mindset of how we had to address our customer base and our business changed overnight. early on, we realized real quickly that, we had a lot of inventory and a lot of stock of things that a lot of the restaurant chains just didn't need because they were shut down real quickly. And how do you rework that product into usable packages, going from 120 count rolls, as an example, to a 10 count where it's usable and somebody actually has the ability to store it at home? So that's been one of the bigger challenges for us, is getting the configuration right and getting that back into the stores. Transportation has been reliable. I would give, kudos to the whole trucking network out there. It's been very beneficial for us that we've had great partnerships to get the product out there, and I look like most manufacturers. But, there's been cases where we've had stores and things like that where we've had to pare down the SKU count and the number of offerings. And it's not because they weren't there, it's because they weren't usable in that particular format, and we wanted to concentrate on what the public could use. So that's been a big challenge for us, is making sure we're delivering to the consumer the right quantity and packaging and usable product for them.
Jack?
Yeah, so from the farm side, we saw a lot of those challenges kind of back up on our farm, excuse me. You think about just here in the U.S., we have roughly 330 million people. And frankly, I struggle to wrap my mind around the scale of that. But think about how much food we need every single day to feed 330 million people. So to dive into a little bit of detail, we'll look at beef and pork. So right before the pandemic hit, we were processing close to 3 million hogs a week, just for the U.S., 3 million hogs a week, and close to 700,000 cattle a week. Once the pandemic hit, certainly a lot of issues went on to that supply chain in terms of they either had to slow down their processes to space people out, they had COVID outbreaks and illnesses, maybe they had to shut down their manufacturing facility entirely. And so on the pork side, we lost almost a million capacity, almost a million hogs a week, and almost 300,000 cattle a week, like that. Those animals are still there. They're still being cared for. They're still being fed. What do you do with all those animals? And that was one of the challenges that we saw, and thankfully most of it has kind of moved forward, and we found ways to adapt to that. But again, just the scale and the processes that are needed to feed that many people, and you can't just not have your animal there. You're raising it, right? You're planning for that next week and the week thereafter. So it's a long process and a long time to raise an animal, and that's just one example. Those are just two products, right, of major disruptions. And think about all the other type of foods that we have, the fruits and all the different kinds of vegetables, dairy, which is butter and cheese, and going on and on and on. A lot of those same type of issues happened, and frankly created a scenario where a lot of our farms just didn't have anywhere to go with their product. How many farms work directly with restaurants? Well, that restaurant's closed, so they don't need your product. So what are you going to do with it? It certainly has created some new opportunities. For me personally, I live here in Columbus. I don't know how many phone calls I've heard from folks looking to talk to a farmer directly so they can just kind of skip the middleman, so to speak, and go directly on farm. But again, most of those farmers need somebody to help process that animal to get it so it's a consumable product for us. So we had some, again, very significant challenges, and certainly highlighted some of the bottlenecks that we have as an industry, and certainly that processing side, particularly on the livestock and dairy side, sometimes has been very significant, and something that we're going to keep our eyes on of how to make improvements there and look for solutions longer term.
Couldn't agree with you more, Jack. For a lot of us that work in the food systems, we make the connections and working with the farmers, the growers, the commodity producers, to those who are processing and manufacturing the food to get it to needy families. By and large, most Americans do not understand what the food system looks like or just how fragile it is. We take for granted that the food is going to be readily available and affordable in our grocery stores. And on that, I think, as we reflect back on the past 7 months, what kind of additional investments are we going to need to make sure that we can adapt and prepare for what could be months, if not a year or two to come before we have a vaccine and are able to get back to normal?
Well, I think one of the things, it's early on, we saw some of the hoarding. You mentioned toilet paper and stuff like that. I think keeping a reasonable sense of the common sense, if we can continue to stress that with our population and our consumers, that's going to go a long way towards helping us. And that's going to ease the pain, because it is going to be painful. And, you know, I have 3 daughters myself, and I try to stress to them, I said, it's not status quo. Nothing is going to be the same way for the next year. And we have to accept that fact now and be ready for that. And one of the things I wanted to add to that previous question is, you know, one of the challenges and struggles that we have, it's not just the food manufacturers, it's not just the farmers. There's so many other essential workers that we've had the opportunity to start to help. And this is the planning process of going forward. It's the cardboard manufacturers. It's the people that are making the bottles for salad dressing, all those different things. It's the seed brokers and things like that. And I think there's a large population of people and occupations that are really changing right now, and we don't want to forget those people. It's not just the people that I have going into the plants each day. There's a whole support structure and system behind that, from healthcare and all those type of things too.
Jack?
Yeah, this is a great question. You know, I think thankfully from the farm side, there have been a lot of adjustments that they've kind of adapted to the new normal, so to speak. But, you know, there's going to be some significant hiccups for a long time. Again, I talked about, you know, half of that dollar we spend typically is outside the home, and it's different, right? What you're buying out at a restaurant is not necessarily what you're buying at home. So if you're a lamb producer, we're not buying a lot of lamb in the grocery store, but you do a lot out at restaurants and other areas. So I think we're going to see some segments of the agriculture industry that are going to continue to have some pretty serious challenges, recognizing we have seen some very significant shifts as a consumer. Now, how long-term that's going to last, I think is the multi-trillion-dollar question, frankly, of the size and scale we're talking about of our economy. But again, I think I'm very confident that our farmers are going to continue to produce, they're going to continue to supply, and you know, they're a very hardy group, and I don't want to, you know, downplay the COVID risk by any means, but they're a group that's just used to dealing with risk, whether it's weather challenges, whether it's financial challenges that are beyond their control. You know, so many of them are impacted by global markets. They're used to, frankly, sticking their neck out there and seeing, you know, we're going to roll the dice today and see what happens. But that's just, it's their life. That's just what they do. And they take great pride in helping feed people like me. And I'm very confident that we're going to continue to have a very strong food supply moving forward. Not that we're going to have problems, not that we're going to have hiccups, but I'm very confident that we'll be able to meet the needs here in the weeks and months ahead.
I want to echo what you both said, including Jeff, about this hoarding. I think a lot of people panicked. I think we're starting to see some of that now pick up about the uncertainty. And what we have urged folks certainly is, if you have more than you could use, please share with your friends and neighbors. The panic of just the toilet paper alone, I think, is a real wake-up call. You don't eat toilet paper. You need food in order to engender an active, healthy life. And I think that the supply chain that you both talked about is that we allowed our supply chains to move further and further away from the point of production, or certainly from the point of processing and manufacturing, and to bring that back and look at our systems more holistically are going to be really important. So we talked about kids, and this was one that we had talked about. Dairy had been challenged for a while now, and when our schools shut down, a lot of folks didn't realize the impact that that had on dairy from moving from those small 8-ounce cartons of milk. What do you do with those, and to get those into household pack sizes and back out? Again, another example of 1.8 million children relied on the National School Lunch Program in the state of Ohio, and nearly 60% of them were low income. So when our schools closed, we needed to be able to get that food that had normally been prepared in school food service and back out. So thinking about those challenges and the things to come, what kind of other adaptability or recommendations do you both have for policymakers on how we can be better prepared in the future? And I say policymakers thinking about local and state as well as at the national level, because the innovation really does start at home. So, Jack?
You talked about regionalization. I think that's something that a lot of our farmer members would love for us as a policymakers to take a more closer look at. So again, we'll go back to that livestock issue. I was talking about the beef. There's 4 companies in the country that control about 80% of the slaughter capacity, and 2 of them are international companies. You know, I think from a public policy standpoint, we would like to continue to see, is it wise to have that tight of a bottleneck for that larger percentage of your food supply? So, you know, I'm not saying right or wrong one way or the other, but I think that's an area that we would love to continue to have a conversation on, and, you know, have some more regional capacity if we do have some hiccups, because we're going to. Unfortunately, this is probably not the last, you know, pandemic type issue the world's going to see in this global environment. So can we have some more regionalization, localization? I think, you know, that's one of the things that we focus on, Farm Bill. So a lot of people hear about the Farm Bill program, right? So two things to think about on that. Number one, about 80% of the Farm Bill is related to nutrition. Programs to help school lunches, to help people that have food insecurity issues. So that money's not going directly back to the farm. And just another little statistic to think about, in any given dollar you spend on food, at most, about 14 cents goes back to the farm. So much more of that dollar is going towards the transportation, the packaging, all the things that go into getting it to us at the end user. And then I think this pandemic, frankly, has really highlighted some of the wisdom that we have used with Farm Bill type programs to keep thousands and thousands of farmers across the country have some risk management and have some safety nets in place for when things don't go right, that when the pandemic like this hits and we need some surplus, we need some cushion within our food systems, when we do have hiccups that we continue to meet all the demands that we need. We've been very fortunate, again, because we've had thousands of farmers that are out there, and programs like Farm Bill, or certain programs within the Farm Bill, help keep their lights on, you know, when they have a bad drought year or a bad weather year. And I think sometimes us as consumers see those programs and maybe scratch our head, does that make sense? But I think during this pandemic has really lifted up the importance of having a broad, robust, regional, you know, we've got farmers all across the country, depending on where you are, that can help us get through difficult times. You know, Iowa, for example, this year, I don't know if you folks saw, they had what's called a derecho came through. Straight line winds, 70, 80 miles an hour, massively damaged almost 14 million acres of crops. Just a huge impact. But thankfully, things are going well in Illinois, in Ohio, in Michigan, and so many other areas around the country. So again, having that kind of robust network to support and lift each other up when things are not going well in your area or pandemic hits, whatever it might be. So I think that's the message, Lisa, that we're going to continue to talk about, is look holistically at that market, and we can't just look at a snapshot. You can't just look, assuming pre-pandemic, everything's great, we've got all these great supplies, we've got all these great issues. Well, overnight it changed. And I think some of those policies that we've had in place, in hindsight, now make a lot more sense and have a lot more value because we did those and we had the people around to produce our food.
I can't go into as much detail as Jack, but from our standpoint, in my experience with Marzetti, we really try to maintain, and we do solid relationships and very positive communication with our local health departments, which, we're inspected quite a bit, the FDA, the USDA, all those different agencies that can affect our business. And it's not just because they can affect our business adversely, but we want to be proactive and on the front side of that communication to make sure that policy changes coming down, different requirements, that we can communicate and react to those effectively. So from that standpoint, I think it's been very good for us, because I just don't get into the grassroots policy like what you're talking about, Jack.
And, there's two things. I always say to folks, you eat or you die. And we have, in this country, again, had a very reliable, affordable food system. And I think this is the first time for many of us that our issues have really been exposed. Jack talked a little bit about our farm safety net in the way of the United States Department of Agriculture. I think early on in the days of the pandemic, most of us saw those images on television of large produce sitting in lots, rotting. And unfortunately, by the time the United States Department of Agriculture could figure out how they were going to get that product, because it was highly perishable, into the emergency food assistance chain, that it was really too late. So instead of bolstering some of our programs, such as the emergency food assistance program, giving states more flexibility, providing additional dollars, whether it was in the CARES Act or the Families First, that I really think the states needed more adaptability in that. The other thing I'm going to say is that food price, and we're all feeling it, our food costs have gone up substantially because of the challenges that we've had. For low-income Ohioans, the 1.6 million that rely on the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the one thing we haven't seen is a boost in their benefits. So we are extremely concerned as we look forward, hopefully after the election, and can come up with the next relief package that we know are going to be really necessary, not only to our farmers, our industries, but the people that have been affected as we attempt to weather the storm, that we see some strategic investments made, and certainly greater flexibility to our states and businesses so we can be able to right ourselves. And at this point, I think we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Jane, who is going to open the floor up for questions.
Well, thank you. And I do have questions from our online audience, but anyone that's in the room, please feel free to come up and ask a question too. This comes from Trip Lazarus. In the vein of let no crisis go to waste, how can the food distribution system learn from this crisis, and in what ways will the system look different after the pandemic?
I think from a manufacturing perspective, one of the things that we've learned is you have to have multiple tiers of redundancy in your supplier network. I think that's the biggest thing for us. It's starting to maintain relationships with not just one major supplier, but really diversify your network out. So when one person in one particular geography does have an issue, maybe it's a COVID outbreak and they might have a facility shut down, that it doesn't cripple you. If anything, it just might slow you down a little bit. So I think that's how we've started to deal with that.
And as I mentioned earlier on some of the regionalization, I think that's an area that we're going to continue to focus. And one major issue that's been on our radar for a long time, and I think to the comment of let no crisis go to waste, I think has really been exposed. And you would maybe scratch your head, what's this have to do with this food supply chain? But that's broadband and internet connectivity. Just in Ohio alone, there's over 1 million households that do not have access to broadband and high-speed internet. And just think about if we're going to have a robust food supply chain, those folks are going to need to educate their kids. They're going to need to have better access to healthcare. They're going to need, just all the business services that demand that you work through the internet. It's really problematic for a lot of Ohioans and, frankly, a lot of Americans across the country. So that's an issue that we're really going to continue to push. And I think, obviously, in this environment of kids working from home, or kids taking school from home, people working from home, it really exposed that it's very, very important to have in this modern era.
Shelley Casto and Bill Lafayette ask a similar question. Please talk about what many see as the need to move to a smaller, more distributed food production system and away from more industrial models, given the likelihood of further disruptions due to climate change. In Bill's question, similar, are there any trends towards shortening the supply chain and engaging more local suppliers?
I can start that one off. Anecdotally and personally, I think I've never seen so much interest in more local food and local connectivity. And I don't see that interest going away. I think people love knowing directly where their food's coming up from and having that access. But at the same time, I think we're going to continue to be more global. So I think you're going to see this interesting bifurcation of a more global food system and a more regional food system at the same time. You know, my interest in coconut oil or something, Ohio clearly is not making coconut oil, right? So you're still going to need those type of products, and our food and our palates just continue to expand, our food palates continue to expand. But I think we are going to want to have a lot more local connectivity, and I think this pandemic has highlighted that, there's a lot of value in being able to source your food locally, but also having access to those global markets and national markets for products that we don't produce here in Ohio.
I think from a transportation and distribution perspective, we have 16 plants. I'm just thinking from a Marzetti network. We have 16 manufacturing plants from East Coast to the West Coast. But one of the things in the past that we didn't have an extensive network of distribution are primarily 2 distribution centers were here based in Central Ohio. One of the things that we started doing a couple years ago, and it's really come to the forefront for us now, is how do we expand that distribution network? And it relates back to that question of, having different satellite distribution centers, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, still here in the middle of the heartland of the country. But it's given us the opportunity to shorten that lead time and to effectively get product to the consumers and distribution centers faster.
I'm going to provide one. I think we need public investment in loan and grant programs to allow for this diversification or conversion of maybe commodity to row crops, to build in more robust local food systems and manufacturing. It's one of the things that I think that we certainly have lost when you talk about a regionalization. We have an abundance of healthy, wholesome food that is grown. I call it the salad bowl of the state. Most people don't even know it exists. Within the muck farmers, for those of you who shop at some of our local chains, you'll see those names. These are generations of family farms, whether it be the Burmas or the Weirs or the Holt Houses. And again, to be able to increase that capacity, we have been working with them through our agriculture clearance program, where we rescue cosmetically challenged fruits and vegetables that are not grade A, but completely wholesome. And is there a way to take that, sustain and expand the shelf life of that product through either canning or freezing the product so we can then extend it to our supply chain as well? But that's going to take capital public investments. Brian?
This whole thing is taking a direction that I hoped it would go. Brian Williams, Local Nexus LLC, and I consult on agriculture and food-related issues. And I'm particularly interested in kind of the regionalization in the supply chain. And Jack, you mentioned the local the slaughterhouses and stuff. A lot of our farmers in Ohio have to schedule the slaughter a year in advance. And they have to schedule the slaughter of their hogs before they're born. I mean, So we have the efficiency right now of things that are very specialized. It's very efficient, but not very resilient. To what extent do we need the more regionalized approach? And Lisa stole my thunder, she's done that before, but how do we finance this stuff? We're doing things differently, and lenders are reluctant to do that. So how do we regionalize? How do we finance it?
I would add on to that. I'm not sure it's just finance and capital either. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's about the people. I think that's one of the big challenges we have. A lot of these types of jobs are very labor intensive. They're not the most glamorous. They're very difficult. And frankly, a lot of people just don't want to do them. So how do we balance that regional investment with having the labor on hand to do it? So that's one of the challenges that agriculture continues to have. It's on the labor side. Pre-pandemic, we had sub 4% unemployment, and a lot of folks just have a very hard time finding people to work and do what needs to be done and whatever their capacity is. So I think that's going to continue to be a challenge for us, no matter which direction we have. I think absolutely the capital and the finances is important, but also how do we have the people there, those hands to do it.
I think the only thing I can add is I think we as a society and as a group of professionals, we have to continue to communicate the needs that the industry has. And we've got to do that to our policymakers in an effective way. And we've got to figure out how to get them to listen and to get the right decision makers in front of the right people.
I could not agree more with both of you as it relates to opportunities for true growth industries. And it really is to be able to introduce folks to careers in the food service industry, whether it be on the retail, on the wholesale, or on the production and the farm side, I think are so important that we've lost a lot of this. It happens in our rural areas, but certainly within our urban areas it doesn't. So I think public investments both at the federal and at the state level are going to be important. Jane?
So we go from local to global. Ohio in the United States is a huge food exporter. We ran into tariffs that were imposed by the administration, and now the COVID. How have our imports or our exports been affected, and our imports too? We're importing food. And how does that affect countries that really depend on the U.S. for a lot of their food?
That's a great question, and it's been a big impact. So roughly 20 to 25% of all the agricultural product in the U.S. gets exported. So a significant amount. It's very important for the health and security and sustainability of our farms that they can export because they need those markets. And then, Jane, that question, clearly a lot of those folks need that food. So it's a win-win. But clearly COVID's been a global issue, and it has impacted trade. It's impacted demand. There's been some very positive aspects where countries like China, for example, had a very serious biosecurity issue with their hog population. They had what's called the African swine fever, and it decimated literally hundreds of millions of hogs. So they've looked to the United States to help export and supply some of those demands. So we are very interconnected on our trade. Countries like Japan and China, and of course Canada and Mexico, we're talking tens and tens of billions of dollars of trade back and forth every year. And it is vital, but it has absolutely been disrupted. And, it's something we're going to continue to try to rebuild some of those markets because they are very important for both sides, for Ohio's farmers and then, of course, for the consumers on the other end.
From a standpoint of the trade mitigation, the United States Department of Agriculture did go in and do buys and bought up a lot of perishable foods that we were the beneficiaries of within the Emergency Food Assistance Network. Unfortunately, those have come in very quickly. They have been dispatched to hungry Americans across the U.S., and we're going to need more investments in our TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, as well as bonus and entitlement. And as I said to both Jack and Jeff when I came in, as we approach the end of the year and great uncertainty as we go into 2021, we are facing a huge commodities cliff within the Emergency Food Assistance Network as these supplies begin to dry up that have gone through the system and not really anything in place. So again, there's going to be a lot of pressure on all of us, both as consumers and as professionals, as we move through to 2021. Next.
Hi, Doug Buchanan, Columbus Business First. Jack, you had mentioned the safety net that we have for farmers. Can you quantify at all how much federal money has been coming into Ohio, and whether that's up, down, and whether it's pandemic-related or trade-related or both, or kind of what is going on with that?
Yes. Pandemic-related, trade-related, yes, those have been part of the disruptions. I can't quantify for you at the top of my head what some of the assistance has been specifically to Ohio, but nationally, I can say it's billions of dollars. It's been very significant, and it's come in various different forms, and depends on your commodity and your what you raise or what you grow. So it is different, but it has been very significant the last several years, particularly this year with a lot of the pandemic dollars and what's called the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, CFAP. We love acronyms in the agricultural space, so CFAP has been very significant. In fact, just this last couple weeks, they've announced some dollars that have come through, and they'll certainly will come to Ohio for a lot of people.
Otterbein Community Engagement asks, how can we ensure fair pricing for farmers while also ensuring fair prices and accessibility for customers? That's the $64 million question.
That's a great question. I wish I had an answer to that one.
Ask a different one that maybe is a little more easily answered. Lainey Cuthbert from our CMC staff asked, regarding food pantries, we're often heard that donating funds is more effective than donating actual items. Is this still true?
That's true. We are able to work directly with manufacturers such as Marzetti and other food manufacturers. We purchase food in semi-tractor trailers. It also takes off the burden of the retailer as well when people go in and clear the shelves of product. So again, cash is always king in our world, but it's all of us working together. The other thing I want to say on that is, you know, maybe it's time that we pay just a little bit more for our food. For those of us that have it, if the farmer can benefit from an increase in his price, the food manufacturer, then we're going to have a lot healthier food system and not so fragile.
Food banks as well. I'm sure Lisa would love to have some more volunteers as well as dollars. You know, unfortunately, a lot of the volunteers have been in that higher risk category and haven't been able to operate in our food banks as much, and you know, they haven't been able to process as much because of that.
Yeah. Thank you both. Thank you so much. Thank you. Tom? Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists. I hope you found today's forum enlightening and informative. I know I did. Coming up this Friday, we're pleased to present a live stream only forum, CMC's 15th Annual Congressional District Conversation, which will be moderated by Mike Thompson of WOSU Public Media. Then, next week on Wednesday, the day after the election, don't miss our post-election analysis featuring prominent Ohio political journalists as they break down the results with an eye towards whatever is next. So thanks again to our sponsor today, the Puffin Foundation West, our live stream partners, PNC and the Columbus Dispatch, and of course to our online virtual seat patrons, thank you all. And of course, a special thanks to our speakers today, Jack Irvin, Jeff Poore, and Lisa Hamler-Fugud, and we want to wish the best of health to Brian Rowe, who was unable to join us today. We hope to see you again soon, but until then, be safe and be well. Thank you.